Hi, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. We are honored and pleased to be joined again as a reprise, but also as an individual one-on-one isolated interview. Mr. Michael Maloof, you'll remember him from our good friend and brother, Major General Valley, who he was on our podcast a couple months ago, and he was actually supposed to be on a few weeks ago and had a prior engagement. So he's been gracious enough to join us on this one-on-one podcast to discuss all things geopolitical and financial at this heightened state that we're in the state of the world. So if you are new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share so that the channel can grow and others can gain in the knowledge you've been afforded. Now, as I always customarily do with our first time guests, in this case individually, I'm going to read Michael's bio summarily. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense. He is a consultant contractor regularly appearing on Russia's RT Sputnik channels, as well as other international media as it said security analyst. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense. Mr. Maloof has nearly 30 years of U.S. governmental service, 23 of which were with the U.S. Defense Department. His areas of specialty include the Middle East, the Caucasus, Central, as well as East Asia. While with the Department of Defense, Mr. Maloof was Director of Technology Security Operations as head of a 10-person team that was primarily responsible in halting the diversion of military critical technologies to countries of national security and proliferation concerned, as well as those involved in sponsoring terrorism. His office was the liaison to the intelligence and enforcement communities within the Office of the Secretary of Defense to halt diversions, which in turn those cases served as early warnings to decision makers of potential policy issues. Due to a specialized training background, Mr. Maloof was assigned under a congressionally mandated Defense Department U.S. Customs Counterterrorism and Counterproliferation Trainer program in order to provide instruction in combating tracking to border guards in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan to deal with the increasing influx of terrorists in those respective countries. He also provided advanced firearms training to Spetsnaz, to Special Forces of the Interior Ministry to the country of Georgia. Mr. Maloof has provided combat tracking training to U.S. Marines. He has a background in executive protection, intermediate and advanced evasive and defensive driving, basic and advanced route analysis, surveillance detection, and attack recognition, as well as off-road driving. Following the events of September 11, 2001, terrorist attack on the U.S., Mr. Maloof was detailed back to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy to prepare analysis of worldwide terrorist networks, their linkages worldwide and to state sponsors, and worked with special operations/low-intensity conflict, known as SOLIC, in order to help determine terrorist choke points for further action. Prior to his career at the Defense Department, Mr. Maloof was a legislative assistant to various U.S. senators, specializing in national security as well as international affairs. In between working at the U.S. Senate and the Defense Department, Maloof was a special correspondent for the Detroit News, a reporter for the specialized newsletter at U.S. News and World Report, and the Washington correspondent for the Union Leader in Manchester, New Hampshire. He is the author of the book, A Nation Forsaken, EMP, The Escalating Threat of an American Catastrophe in 2013, and his ebook, ISIS Rising, Prelude to a Neo-Ottoman Caliphate in November of 2014. And that gave him a chance to enjoy some of his cigar as I read his systematic bio. With that being said, Michael, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, John. I'm doing well. Thank you.
It's an honor. And as you can see, folks, you see his impressive bevy of accommodations and background. You can clearly see why we wanted him, for among many reasons, to be on the podcast. So, Michael, I'm going to start right off the bat with no nonsense, as you would expect. Recently, Intel Slava mentioned that President Putin was going to have to get involved in resolving the Middle Eastern battle between Israel and Iran. Do you believe that to be correct? And if so, what specific actions will he have to take in order to resolve the conflict?
If Mr. Putin is to get involved in that, I think he needs to basically take care of his own problem first, and that's Ukraine. However, he does have influence with Iran. As long as that particular regime stays in place. Iran, from a geostrategic and geopolitical standpoint, is very important to both Russia and China. It is a crossroads, north, south, east, west, corridor for for BRICS, for the Belt and Road Initiative, and if Iran were under the existing leadership were to go away, that would create a major geopolitical shift for both Russia and China. So it's really to Putin's advantage to try to get engaged. And I think that, and I know that Putin called Trump to say he offered his services because he can influence the regime there. And but right now we're at a very heightened sense of state in which Trump has basically told Putin to butt out for now because he take care of his own problem, and he's fed up with both the crises, Ukraine and Middle East. I don't think Trump wants another war, but he'd walk into it, and that's what I'm concerned about. There's an element within the U.S. government that's coalescing that is driving him in that direction, and I think it's and we've got to see where he's going. He's been very reluctant to pull the trigger, and just now he said he's going to give him another 2 weeks, or within 2 weeks. That could mean tomorrow, for all I know.
Right.
So so we're at a very precarious time. The Iranians are realize that when Trump makes a deadline, he means it, and rather than, which has been their customary approach of just kicking the can and trying to prolong the discussions endlessly, and now they're learning that in dealing with Trump, you either come up with something certain or there are alternatives.
Agreed. And before we go forward, President Trump, because I do have some thoughts on that to share with you or to coalesce with you. You mentioned, and I'm glad you because we're tracking on the same mindset as I had hoped we anticipated that we would. You're right. He has his own issues to deal with Russian, Ukrainian. So with that conflict, how soon do you think that will be resolved? Do you think both issues will get resolved at the same time or close to each other?
Even though they're separate, they're interrelated. You have there's a concern that I don't think they're going to get resolved anytime soon. Each conflict zone has its own issues, and I think Ukrainians are resorting more to an insurgency effort within Russia, and I think that Russia will respond very vehemently and come back very hard on the Ukrainians. They've got the manpower, they've got the forces, and I think Putin has withheld anything decisive because he's basically tried to placate Trump. And besides that, he wants to regain reestablish diplomatic relations with the United States. So he's walking a thin line, but he can also offer help with Iran. On the other hand, because Iran does listen to the Kremlin. They have a strategic arrangement. It's not a defensive thing of like an Article 5 of NATO, but at the same time they have offered assistance, and I wouldn't doubt that we'll continue to see that. I don't see the Iranian regime going away that quickly right now. I don't think we have seen everything that they have in the way of armaments, in the way of skills of warfare. After all, it's a 5,000-year-old civilization, and somehow they've managed to stay pretty much intact. They've contracted somewhat over the centuries, but at the same time, their influence is still very great. Their influence with their proxies are remain in place. They and you cannot rule out the possibility that those proxies could, in their way, rise up just to agitate, should the United States undertake a direct attack on Iran.
So I'm really, thank you, Michael. I'm really glad that you said that the Iranian Israeli conflict and the Russian-Ukrainian conflict are not that divided. I agree. I think they're correlated in a number of ways, particularly as it relates to the financial reset, the global reset, and the currencies, individually and vis-a-vis BRICS, they do need to be addressed and treated in a similar fashion. Which brings me to my next question slash point. President Trump, as you're probably aware, has mentioned that about 6 p.m. East Coast time, he's going to make a decision about whether he's going to get involved in this and to what extent. We believe that he will not engage in a war, but he will make it. It may appear that way to optically to the world, but in actuality, what he's going to do is help take out the because there's a lot of, as you know better than I do, there's a lot of Christians in both Iraq and Iran who are going against the Iranian revolution, and they want to see this. And I believe that Netanyahu did an internal message. You can maybe expound on this. So bear with me a moment here. Netanyahu did an internal message to the Iranians that he's for them to topple the corrupt regime and break it up and set the people free. And I think Trump is kind of doing the same thing likewise. So with all that being said, do you see it that way? Do you see it a different way? Do you see it somewhere in the middle? What are your thoughts?
Well, having experienced in 2003 what we did in Iraq, I'm very concerned, to be honest with you. There again, you had a premise of we went into Iraq at the behest of then Netanyahu under George W. Bush because Iran, or Iraq rather, was a threat to Israel at the time. And when I was at the Pentagon, the notion was we go into Iraq, that would form a hub in which we would then seek regime change in Iran, Syria, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, and even it's not mentioned today, but it was Saudi Arabia as well, because they have very close ties with the Iraqis at the time. So it's all of that came to a roaring halt after we got stymied in Iraq. We built the largest embassy there, only to be with the notion that we were going to be using it as that hub for other activities in the Middle East, but it never came to fruition. Now we're building another huge embassy in Lebanon. Maybe we're recasting things toward Lebanon now, and I've noticed that Netanyahu has laid off of Beirut a little bit, except in South Beirut, but I don't think that I don't think that Trump wants the government in Lebanon to be threatened. And so Lebanon has been somewhat spared of all of this for now. And we're also in the Syria thing, and Syria has changed. So, but to get back to your point, what I saw back then seems to be a carbon copy, or what we're seeing today is going to be a carbon copy of what happened back then. And I'm really concerned about it. And we need to learn from the lessons of the past. And we went into Iraq under what was now considered a false premise of WMD. And my particular office was one in which we did not assess there was WMD, operational WMD. And I basically made that point to upper management at the time. And that, of course, it was ignored because the notion was we were going to go in for regime change into Iraq no matter what. The decision had been made. We were just looking for a reason that the international community could buy into, and that was WMD. And once we were in there, couldn't find it.
Right. So thank you, Michael. I can see your concern. I can see why you say that based on your long, protracted historical experiences, which are all valid, of course. One of the many reasons you're here to help us kind of separate the piles and get to the clarity for people. I think the difference is that Trump's not deep state and that he really does want to end banker wars, I believe. And he wants, with the reset, he said it in his first term, a level playing field that would be free and fair for everyone. Go ahead.
Well, I would suggest that he can be influenced by the deep state and by the neocons. They're coalescing, and what I'm concerned about is the dismissive way that he treated Tulsi Gabbard the other day. His DNI, his Director of National Intelligence. To be honest with you, that was a surprise to me when she basically had just testified that there was no evidence by the intelligence community that that Iran has a nuclear weapons program. And then that was validated again by the head of, by Grassi, the head of IAEA. He said the very same thing. And yet Trump on a plane flight the other night said, asked the question about Tulsi Gabbard's assessment, said, I don't care what she says. So it makes me wonder that based upon how Netanyahu got Trump into to drop out of the JCPOA back in 2018, in which Iran was in full compliance at the time, and we saw that after that, Iran picked up on its nuclear development program, enrichment program. They wouldn't have done it unless if the U.S. had stayed in there. Now I see, fast forward to today, are we about to witness the very same thing again? You have Netanyahu saying they're within 2 weeks, 3 weeks of having a nuclear weapon. Okay, I've been hearing Netanyahu say that for more than a decade. They're within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month. He's been saying it for over 10 years. I mean, something it doesn't make sense here. And I've seen no evidence of it coming from him. And for our director of national intelligence to say they don't have that evidence themselves, it makes me wonder then, why are we having this? Why is there this gap between what she is saying under current intelligence and what Netanyahu is saying? And that has not been answered by the White House.
Right.
And
So
I wonder, I wonder if that makes, if that, given that serious discrepancy, whether that's a basis to go to war or not on our part.
So I can appreciate what you're saying, and I hear that. I acknowledge that's a valid perception or position to take based on past events that you've had. What we believe is that he's playing the deep state a little bit. He's baiting them because a lot of times he says one thing and does another. So it's not to delegitimize your point. It's just to take a positive version of the devil's advocate to look at the other side of it, if that makes sense, which I think.
Yeah, well, I will acknowledge, based upon his first term, he had the deep state basically running things, and he learned from that.
Yeah, he didn't know what he was doing. Yeah.
Yeah. And now he's learned from that.
He has.
Now, but look who he's surrounded by. Surrounded by deep staters all over again, and people that are very pro-Israeli, and we're hearing the same old mantras that we heard back in 2003. You see, this is the problem when someone like myself has a corporate memory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they probably try to get rid of us ultimately, because then they have to reinvent the wheel and
Right.
then relive history all over again, because they don't learn from the past. But we've got to learn from the past. And in this case, we have to be very careful. And if we can use the auspices, renew relationship, for example, with Russia, and use them to help us and the West to do that. But you see, you got to consider Netanyahu's position. Mm-hmm. He's trying to survive politically, and he's already got elements within his own government that are ready to walk if he doesn't attack Iran. He's gotten the United States to the point where Trump is now thinking seriously of bombing, coming in on this war. To enter the war is one thing. To get out of it's going to be another, because it could become very protracted very, very fast. And I could just see elements around in the region that are just waiting. And that's what I'm worried about. It's the unknown that I'm concerned about. And we have not fully assessed that, nor has it been debated.
Fair enough. So consider this, Michael. What's the old adage? You know it better than I do, having been more, well, I'm just saying, having more seasoned experience in the world. And he said it many times before, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And that's what we believe he's doing with the deep state. He's bringing them into his net so he can draw them in. You got to make them think you're on your side and then lower the boom. And to your point, go ahead.
You can extend that by saying that's what he needs to do now with Putin, and he needs to do also perhaps with the supreme leader. Maybe Trump needs to meet with the supreme leader.
I think that's what he's doing with Netanyahu, to be honest with you, is trapping him in the web. And yes, Netanyahu has been saying for years, and we've seen different iterations of that. Also, to your point earlier about Russia and Ukraine, I don't know if you mentioned this, so if you did, I apologize. But also, Turkey is a very valuable ally in all of this as well, as you know.
Well, Turkey, Erdogan and Trump are very close.
Oh yeah,
Trump trusts him. You got to look at that background. But Erdogan also plays both ends against the middle as well. He's sounding very bellicose toward Israel right now, but at the same time, he's allowing U.S. aircraft to land at Incirlik and what have you to stage should there be any attack. So he plays both ends, and he's also upset Putin a lot, even though they're supposed to be close. So he's got 1 foot in the east, 1 foot in the west, and he has been invited to be a partner, if you will, to BRICS, even as a NATO member, and a lot of that is in response to the fact that he was never allowed to come into the EU. So he's looking for that alternative economic forum, but at the same time, it's drawing him more eastward. And this is something we've got to watch. He has extended his influence into what is considered to be the soft underbelly of Russia, which is in the Caucasus and Central Asia areas, which puts him in very close touch with Azerbaijan. So are the Ukrainians, and he's been assisting the Ukrainians in arming them with drones that have attacked the Russians. So as I say, he's been playing both ends, and yet he somehow has managed to survive. But at the same time, you hear Netanyahu saying, Erdogan saying, we're going to wind up in Jerusalem someday. He's been talking that way once again. So it really depends upon what day it is and what side of the bed he gets up on, I think.
Yeah, I think to your point, we have to look at the long, protracted view of things and not so much the short term, but you're helping us to see the puzzle pieces. And just an addendum point, Michael, to what you were sharing, back to Turkey, they play, as you know, an instrumental part in Iraq for their currency revaluation because of the water rights that they can give a water challenged area as a massive desert out there. They're going to need that, particularly with the Kurdistan region as the largest faction out there. So there's a lot of interesting interplay going on, to your point.
Oh yeah, well, they have bases in northern Iraq,
Yeah.
They still have bases up there. They refuse to leave. They've been invited to leave, but they refuse to leave. So yeah, the influence is there. You see, Erdogan's, I think, ultimate goal, even though he's been a friend of Hamas as well, but his ultimate goal is to be the spokesperson for the Sunnis, all this for Sunni Islam. And that puts him in direct competition with the Egyptians and also with the Saudis. But now the Saudis and the Egyptians are working with Trump, and Trump has very good relationship with Erdogan. So Trump seems to be the element that's holding this very, very crazy patchwork together at the moment.
Yeah, the glue, if you will. And just a quick sidebar, Michael, too, going back to, because I think it was an important point you made about the Lebanese sort of being, put to the side for the moment. I don't know, but I think it was about, was it 2022 or 23? Their currency got devalued massively, like 90%.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that might be part of it. Like they've been so beaten down. It's like there's hardly anything left to take right now. So they're not enough of a threat because of that.
Half the population is starving.
Yeah.
I've been in and out of Lebanon many times.
Right.
It used to be 1,500 lira to a dollar. And that was the same year after year after year. And then suddenly when that occurred, and a lot of it had to do with the head of the Bank of Lebanon. He's siphoning stuff off to foreign accounts, and I think he's supposed to be on trial.
Sound a lot like Iraq, Iran to me, with the corrupt Iranian proxies that are now
all corrupt.
Well, they're all corrupt, just like here in America. Yeah, right. But we break up the corruption, we break up the regime change, and we can finally have. I'm going to just take all of your historical experiences, and they're incredibly valuable and valid. At the same time, as you would want to do, take a positive, hopeful, optimistic approach that God is in control, and as a result, things are going to be different this time than in ways that we have not yet seen. That's how we're looking at it.
Well, we like to hope that there's a greater being up there that is going to help us out and give us guidance and see us through this. This is we're at a very propitious moment right now, and I'm sure that I'm glad that Trump has delayed things for another few weeks to give more level-headed thinkers to come on in. I think we need in this administration more strategic thinkers, geostrategic thinkers. We don't have them right now. They only react to events. And the one consistency that has been involved in influencing him, however, has been Netanyahu and the lobbyists that support him, that support Netanyahu, and basically work on, have supplied funds to Trump's campaign. So this is another consideration. But Trump is also deeply religious. On the other hand, it's a Judeo-Christian influence that greatly supports Israel. But at the same time, he's got to be concerned that Netanyahu, for his own political survival, doesn't get us involved in a war. I'd like to point out to people that, since the time of Jesus, the Jews have always tried to get someone else to do their fighting. And that's what he's been trying to do with us. What Netanyahu has been trying to do with the United States is get us involved. He did a certain amount of hitting Iran, hitting Iranian targets, but he wants us to perform the coup de grace. And that could get us more greatly involved. Right now, but then if we're going to get involved, you got to ask the question: to what extent is Iran a national security threat to the United States? Right now, there's some very serious debate going on whether that's the case. They don't have the nukes, they don't have the missile delivery systems for it, and yet you have persistence in trying to decapitate Iran as we know it. And what does that do? It would have the effect of containing Russia and China. That will be one geopolitical consequence,
right,
if that regime falls. So you're going to have the neocons who are going to be pushing that narrative. That's what I'm seeing here. But what does that do for us long term? We've seen the consequences of all the wars. We haven't won a conflict since World War II. And we've been in Vietnam, we've been, we were in Iraq, we were in Afghanistan, and we have nothing to show for it except turmoil and endless wars. We've been in endless wars since 2001.
Which he wants to end the endless, and that those were banker wars. That was the difference, and that's what we need to cut the head of.
All banker wars. They're all
exactly. But
and industry wars too, because it enhances the pockets of the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower was right.
Right, and I'm not speaking for you in any of this, Michael. I'm just saying back to your point that you raised. I know that there's a God, because I'm not it, you're not it, and he sits over everything, and he saved my life more than I could have possibly imagined. So I'll go down swinging with him, and I have faith that he will.
We all seek guidance. We all seek his guidance. Yeah. We have to.
I think more need to. Yes, more need to. But just speaking personally to your point. Yeah. Thank you for that. Moving forward to the next point, and this is something I don't hear talked enough, and you're a perfect person because you mentioned it on our first podcast, whatever it was, 6 weeks, 2 months ago with General Valley, if you remember. We brought you in sort of de facto, which was a blessing. You've been to Russia and the Kremlin several times. You've worked with Putin. You've orchestrated the nuclear football and so forth, or soccer ball, I should say. So I don't know if you've met her, but in terms of Melania, she seems to play a very prominent role in things behind the scenes. My understanding is that she was handpicked by President Putin as a gift to President Trump many years ago. Is there any truth to this? And what do you see as her role in this movement? Is she playing the Queen's Gambit?
Be honest with you, I have not heard that story.
Okay.
I don't know if she was a plant, but for Donald Trump, but he was a real estate tycoon at the time. So I don't think he had any notions of politics at the time. He would criticize, but I don't know that. I mean, if it happened very recently, that would be another matter. But I have not heard that. But she's a quiet influence on him. He does listen to her. There's no question about it. And she tends to be much more concerned about the impact on people, children. She's showing her interest in working in education and children, and I think that could be translated to Donald Trump's actions and thinking in terms of what's been going on in Gaza, and in terms of what the 50,000 plus Palestinians that have been killed, women and children. To even though October 7th was bad, it was very bad, and it should never have happened, but it did. And there's some debate there's some issue whether Netanyahu allowed that to happen. I don't know, but that's under investigation. I'll be quick to add that's under investigation, and it should be, because was that a setup? I don't know, especially after warnings were given by his own people that something was, and nothing, and there was no action. So that's an important thing. It's like, like the whole debate over the Pearl Harbor, did we know about that they were about ready to attack, that kind of a debate. So there is an active investigation going on in Israel on that. So that said, I think the United States needs to be very cautious, given our track record, given where we've come from over the last 25 years. We need to be very careful and thoughtful, and be able to lend more geostrategic thinking to our plans. What is in our national interest? It can't be the entire. Yeah, we can trade and all that in the world, but to have 12 carrier strike groups that push our hegemony around the world, it's getting us into a lot of trouble. And then we have to pay for that. We have over 800 bases around the world. We should be cutting those in half. A lot of them are from old remnant policies that we don't even adhere to anymore. And so, we could be saving a lot of money and in defense spending in the one sense, or maybe redirect defense spending in other directions that would be more profitable. We do need more ships, but on the other hand, do we need more aircraft carriers? I would argue that aircraft carriers today, given the advancement of hypersonics, are virtually dead in the water. And if one of those carriers is hit, that's 5,000 personnel, and that would be a disaster.
Agreed. Well, just real quick, Michael, just to inject something to the table of what you've copiously shared. She is, I believe, of Russian descent in some capacity, and you'll notice Slavic, yes, but she does have a keen interest in that area as well, in some capacity. And so
she's Eastern European.
Exactly, that's what I was driving at. And so you notice that on Flag Day, she stood in front of President Trump, which I have never seen before, almost like the Queen protecting the King. And there's a lot of chess movements and sort of comms going, within the movement, if you will, to be, sort of mindful of. So just to add something to what you're saying. And to our first question before I move forward is, with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, it's almost impossible. I know that Ukraine has a lot of supporters, there's a lot of money laundering, trafficking. Deep state has used that as a harbinger for years, but that's still Russian territory, specifically with Donbass and Lugansk. They've been helping the people. They've been feeding and clothing, rebuilding the apartment complexes, fighting against the Azov Battalion, which are Nazis, neo-Nazis. I am just not convinced that they're not going to win that war, that they're going to step their foot down, finish it.
But as I said, I think Putin has been restrained,
Yeah.
very restrained. He's got hypersonics.
Yes.
Hypersonics in that theater maybe take 3 minutes.
Yeah.
There would be no warning. He's got the manpower, he's got the armaments, and he's got the size. And I might add too that the Ukrainians historically have been trained in defense as a defensive force, not as an offensive force.
Mm.
Cannot they don't have the training to actually go back and take any of that territory. And besides that, it was Russian speaking territory. And we're also and given how relatively new Ukraine as a nation state is, even the western part is in jeopardy simply because you have historically the Poles, the Lithuanians, the Hungarians, who all went back portions of that because they have speakers from their respective countries still in those areas. You see, that area used to be part of the old Lithuanian Polish Republic, going back 2 centuries. And now we see an effort to regain that territory by the Poles, by the Lithuanians, and it's very intriguing that they're raising centuries old feuds once again. It's sort of a payback to get back at a time that Ukraine as a nation state is now down on the and with the Russians now taking back that the eastern portion of Russian speaking, and Crimea, all Russian speaking. It makes you wonder what's going to be left of the nation state of Ukraine. And back, I remember one interview that Blinken had when he was Secretary of State. He remarked how his grandparents were from Kiev, which he then said was part of Russia. Yeah, it was part of the Russian Republic at that time. That was in 1905. There was no Ukraine.
Good point. Really good point.
All brand new, and these historically, these countries in the surrounding area all want portions back, and it's just a question of time. Putin himself said, "Look, I don't want the whole country," and I think he knows that the western portion will just be gobbled up by these surrounding states only because of the weakness of Ukraine right now. That said, you have the Azov and the other right-wing groups, the neo-Nazi groups, that will do anything to perpetuate a war against Russia,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
even if it means going against their own Kyiv government. And that's why Zelensky, I think, is now caught between the proverbial rock and hard place. He can't negotiate anything. No, first of all, he knows he can't get anything back, but he can't say, "Yeah, I'll negotiate," because the Azov people will kill him within an hour.
Don't think Trump didn't trap him and set him up in this cyclone to never interfere with an enemy who's in the process of destroying themselves. Sun Tzu, you know that.
I agree.
And everything comes back to its central point, Michael, in history, right? Everything returns back to its center. So
we got to read history. We got to know history of the regions in order to understand where we are now.
absolutely agree, 100%. And that's what you're instrumental in, amongst other things, in helping us to do. So thank you for that. Switching gears a little bit, Michael, to respect your time, onto the economic front, which is, as you probably know, where we spend the majority of our time, just where we're led. But we also understand the importance of how these two worlds marry together. So on the economic front, you need a lot of distractions to do something, whether it's a war or it's a financial reset, whatever it might be. Are all these moves and counter moves that we're seeing playing out ultimately a distraction to keep the public off guard so that the godly financial reset can occur with respect to the foreign currencies and BRICS, cryptos, precious metals, and the like?
It's going to happen. It's going to get even worse, and more competitive.
Mm-hmm.
You see BRICS right now. If it weren't for Trump, BRICS would be probably a little further ahead than it is right now. But but yet BRICS is proceeding. When I was in Kazan last October for the annual BRICS meeting, chaired by the Russians, you could 50 countries leaders showed up. It really demonstrated one thing, that Putin was not isolated in the world, contrary to Ukraine. but yet it showed that they want to continue on not only de-dollarizing, but not to substitute necessarily a separate currency, but to de-dollarize and maybe have an alternative financial system, which will be more adaptable for them to use to transfer funds, since Russia and a number of these countries are blocked from using the SWIFT system, which is out of Brussels, the Western system. And now Russia's beginning to say, look, we don't even have an interest in wanting to reattach to SWIFT. So that says something very significant to me. But there are some banks that still, even Russian banks, that are exempt from any sanctions and are still allowed to work through the SWIFT system.
I always laugh at that name SWIFT because it's an oxymoron. It's anything but. Should be called the slow system. But with the new QFS digital financial gold asset back, because the world's awash with gold, that all too well. Got to bring up some interesting points, Michael, to support what you're saying. I believe Russia, last I checked, is either 4th and 5th in the world in gold reserves, and I think 7th or 8th in currency reserves. Not a coincidence, as being akin to one of the leaders of BRICS with the unit you're talking about back in October of last year, rightly to your point. And I believe now we're looking at upwards of 100 nations and growing. It's our contention, Michael, that what they're going to do is, people have argued on both sides, and I see both sides of it. But anyway, I digress, that we're not going to get rid of the dollar. We're just going to do it differently. Either way, I see the Federal Reserve going away and us doing the U.S. note as we go back to the gold standard and remove the mistakes of Kissinger and Nixon, again, before my time, but you remember, because I've been watching this closely. That's going to basically break the construct, the middle that's kept it together, apart, so that both sides can be freed up. We can go back to an asset backed in real assets, remove the private Western central bank, remove the Fed and all that BS, 14th Amendment, while at the same time, BRICS can go ahead and, as you said, de-dollarize and power up in their own stuff under an SDR with trade and commerce. You just had Putin, I think it was today or yesterday, you'll have to tell me, is endorsing, who is it? Indonesia, the rupiah is going to be now. We knew that was coming. Also, Brazil just welcomed in Vietnam. That's a country I'm very close to watching. They have a ton of gold reserves, 8% GDP, massive manpower. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what you're saying right now is something very significant, and which screams for the dollar to go back under the gold standard.
Yes,
because they're backed by tangibles. Right. That's what these other countries are doing. They're backed by tangibles, and that's what they look for. Intangibles can be, even rice for that matter, but it's primarily gold. Something that we're only fiat. It's just paper, print,
zero value.
But what Trump has done, he's done something intriguing. He's sort of stymied these countries totally de-dollarizing. Although I think they're on a dual system. They're going to continue the dollar, but at the same time continue and enhance trading in their local currencies, which is going to be it's not going to be the BRICS currency, but that's going to be what their medium of trade is going to be through the new bank that they did, and which are issued tokens for that trade. It's a sort of a Hawala system, if you will, of the East. But at the same time, Trump basically said, look, the U.S. would impose 100% secondary sanctions on any country that de-dollarizes or works with Russia, China through the BRICS system. So I think this has had a dampening effect on countries rallying to do that. But you still have the countries in the global South, principally in Africa and in Latin America, that are gravitating more and more in that direction.
Yep.
And they're, except that they're going to operate under a dual system, so that they have an alternative system in which to trade if they get cut, if they're sanctioned with from the West, then they have an Eastern way of trading. And that was the one message that Putin gave in Kazan when I was there, that the alternative system that they were setting up was not anti-West, but it was to be a substitute should developing countries primarily not have an avenue through the existing Western institutions for trade, for development funds for their own purposes. And besides that, it's tainted with politics from the West, with the clean energy approach that a lot of these countries, like in Africa, have adopted, but they're going broke as a consequence. They can't afford it. They can't afford the so-called clean energy approach, which is very expensive in order to transfer. And when you get down to the local level of people cooking with propane, even propane is supposed to go away under that regime. So this is very hurtful to the developing countries as well. That's why they're looking to that Eurasian alternative, and yet we don't seem to be too sensitive to it.
So a couple thoughts, if I may, Michael, to your very cogent point. Here's what, when I say us, our team that supports us, here's our conclusion. Firstly, it's an East-West reset. There's no doubt about that. That's where it's going. Secondly, what we see is that President Trump, and you'll forgive the term, I don't mean it the way it sounds because it's not very PC, but he's retarding the system to line them up together so that they'll synergize, right? Because what he really wants is for these countries to operate on a level playing field based on assets in the ground. So BRICS affords these countries like Vietnam, Iraq, and a whole lot of them, basically the power play, including Zimbabwe, by the way. 40% of the world's gold, just saying, 90% of the world's chromium and palladium and many other things, 10% of the world's water supply, as you know. I think that's important to denote. It allows them a way through the SWIFT system while at the same time allowing them to be autonomous and power up their country's currencies based on assets in the ground, to include gold and silver and many, many other things. So it's a win-win situation. That's what we believe ultimately President Trump is working to achieve, and much sooner, I would add, than later. Would you agree?
I think he's trying, but he's a little preoccupied with other issues right now. But you see the Russians moving in to fill that void. They're rushing into that sub-Sahara area that you just outlined, because that there's a band of countries through there that are rich in gold and other minerals that are very valuable, and they form the basis for the tangibles that will support their currencies. And that's what the Russians are after, and the Chinese, I might add.
Yes, and lithium and white gold as well. And to add to what you're saying, Michael, let's not forget, under all of this maelstrom of information, that both China and Russia, BRICS, have memorandums of understanding with Iraq, Vietnam, and a host of other countries. And when they make a deal, they don't play. They expect you to adhere to that, as you know better than anybody, being in Russia. So President Trump, as you know, recently attended earlier this week the G7 summit in Canada, something he said originally he wouldn't do. So there's those moves and counter moves again. What was the main impetus behind him going? Was it to signal to the public that Canada is going to be set to be the 51st state, while at the same time exposing the deep state out in front for the public to see? Is that a possibility?
I think, number one, G7 is anathema. I mean, it's old. I mean, the Russians aren't even interested in joining, although he thought it ought to be a G8 once again. The Russians are more interested in the G20. It includes a greater variety of countries. It isn't just limited to the G7, which are principally the Eastern or the West European countries, which Russia is against right now. And also, they're broke. They've been financing this war in Ukraine to the detriment of their own economies, and now they're running huge deficits. And Trump, I think he was a little preoccupied with what's going on in the Middle East. Number two, I think he was fed up with, he didn't want to meet Zelensky, who was there trying to make another pitch. And thirdly, he's fed up with Macron. Macron is just a toothless tiger.
Garbage.
And yeah, what was the point of sticking around? I might add that as a result of that experience with G7, there's only going to be one day of meetings under NATO at the NATO summit. They were going to have it stretched out to 3. And I think they've limited the number of hours in that one day that there will be a NATO meeting, because they expect Trump just to get up and walk out.
Right. It's very accurate, Michael, but you do realize the irony in your statement that all of the things you just rightly articulated only hasten the need for a global currency reset because they're broke. The entire world is broke
It's going to that. It's heading in that direction.
very quickly, very
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah, it's accelerating.
Yes.
Yeah, some of the policies and statements that recent statements Trump has made may have tripped him up a little bit, may have delayed it a little bit, but I think that train has left the station, and we're seeing an alternative financial system emerging now from the Eurasian nation to challenge that in the West. The Bretton Woods system is almost obsolete, and that stems from right after World War II, when the dollar was declared to be the world currency.
Mm-hmm.
And as a consequence, even Putin acknowledged that. But what we're hearing today is that Bretton Woods is obsolete. It stems from experiences that occurred back in the last century, and we have moved on. Now we need to catch up and bring the systems, the world systems, up to the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
I'd add, we're seeing that also with how feckless our international institutions are when it comes time to dealing with crises. They're totally useless, but they're products of the 20th century, not of the 21st century. And we need to update them.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt, Michael. I mean, you know better than anyone with your long, illustrious history in the public and private sector and being in the Kremlin and seeing it, as you said, with BRICS last year. You've seen it from all these different vantage points, which makes these podcasts with you invaluable because it helps point our audience to their own conclusions of truth, you know, depending on what vantage point they take, but they can see it front and center with good people like you. No, you're welcome. You know as well as I do, the point being, my overarching point is central banks only last 40 to 50 years. We're way overdue. We're about 4 or 5 years overdue at least from seeing this. So it's just time. Everything has a season, as Ecclesiastes would say. So
yeah, I'm not an economist, but I can see the frustration that Trump exhibits every day with Colin Powell, for example, with the Federal Reserve.
He's not long. Yeah, he's not long for this earth.
The system needs to be changed. You're absolutely right, even in this country. And we need to get back on the gold standard. And hopefully within his administration, he does something in a very serious way in that direction. I
think you're about to see it, Michael, and silver, I might add as well. The certificate.
Yes. Anything that's tangible. I don't care if it's diamonds or real diamonds.
Yeah, right. No cubic zirconium.
Zirconium comes in, that plays into it. Anything that is tangible that is important. Today it's just paper printing on our part with the full faith and credit, but we're getting to the point now with what are we, 34 trillion in debt that we will not be able to pay it back.
Well, full faith and credit's an illusion, number one. You know that as well as I do. Secondly, I've interviewed people like Bill Holter, who do with John Rich's he did a book about the real rate of unemployment, the real rate of inflation. It's really closer to 317 trillion. We're not paying that back. So we're just going to default and reset it. That'd be the easiest way in about a second they can do it. And I think that's what we're ginning up to.
Yeah, but what will be the ramifications, the ripple effect throughout the world's economy? It'll be depression.
Well, Michael, if you look economically at the real numbers, we've been in depression since 2022 because it's defined by 5 or more quarters of negative GDP. We already have been there. They're just not going to say it. So it is going to create a disparity between the rich and the poor. The good news is for people who have taken action, invested in tangible things like foreign currencies, backed by precious metals, certain cryptos, certain bonds. Zimbabwe, other bonds, German bearer, they'll be able to take gas. Oil and gas, yes, absolutely. Oil and gas, 100%. Are going to be able to be a part of that 1% and help the disparity in between that gap is my point. So last question for today, and I really appreciate your patience. You've been to the Kremlin in Moscow several times. You've given your position on that in our last podcast with Major General Valley. If you're able to share, if not, I understand. Were you planning to go back anytime soon, or is there a special mission that you might be called upon to go there?
I go only on an invitation basis. Uh, the times that I went, number one was to cover the BRICS conference on behalf of RT to give a U.S. Western perspective, and then I was invited to an international meeting that lasted a few days, and so I only go by invitation. I don't go as a tourist. I have other people pay my way.
That helps.
Oh, yes. No, I can only, that expedites visas as well.
Yeah,
To get on over there. But I'm prepared to go back, and because it's important to hear other perspectives, to see other perspectives. I know when I was in Russia in 1990, right after 91, rather, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, we were one of the first Defense Department teams that went in there. It was bleak, it was quiet, no lights at night. It was pretty much what you would expect to see. It's pretty much what I saw in East Berlin when I was there. It was bleak, but then I went back in 2017 with General Valley, and then again last year. It's like a difference of night and day.
yeah,
It's lights everywhere, young people on the streets, music everywhere,
vibrant.
and it was just like a total 180 of what it was.
I hear their subway systems are immaculate and very opulent.
Oh yeah, they are beautiful. They are beautiful. They're bomb shelters too, but they are very artistic. I think the subway system in Stockholm has copied what the Moscow subway system looks like, because at every stop there's a different motif, and
Mhm.
and it's very artistic. All of them are very artistic, and they're worth going to see if you get over there.
Definitely. Last question I have to ask, because you've done it and probably most of us will never get to do it. You've met with Putin several times. What's he really like behind closed doors?
Well, to be honest with you, I've never met him personally.
Okay.
I'll just be honest with you.
No, sure.
I have not met him. I've met a lot of people around him. I've met with people in the foreign ministry. I've never met him personally, but he appears to me to be a real strategic thinker. He's having had an intelligence background. He's very measured.
Mhm.
He's got he tends to be able to handle multitask things and see and be like 5-6 steps ahead. He makes it for an excellent chess player, and because he's able to outsmart every time, and he doesn't fly off the handle. He's totally the opposite of a Donald Trump when it comes to personality.
Right.
But he's always thinking. He's always measured in his ways, and I've heard that from other Russian officials in measuring who have been in his company, that he's very thoughtful. He wants to get all perspectives, and he takes his time in analyzing and studying the issue. He's not only a lawyer, but he's also a historian. So he's got a wealth of background and information, and his orientation has always been in the West, because he was born in St. Petersburg, which is the westernmost Russian city, but he also served in Germany as an intelligence officer. So he's had that the Western exposure. He knows the West, and of course Lavrov has also similarly had Western background and experience, and given his travels to the United States, and the Russian officials that I meet are very Westernized. They know how to talk with Americans. They know their ways. Some of them speak better English than most Americans. They're so articulate, and they can talk virtually without an accent. That's amazing. Wow. So they're very well trained.
That's impressive. Thank you for that. And I think it's an important point to end on, to underscore history and Russia and their importance within the American construct of society, in that Russia actually bailed us out geopolitically and financially during World War II, and they're set to do it again.
I can give you one better.
Please.
They opposed the British in any British blockade of the U.S. colonies. And they did the same for the for the in this in back in the North, in the Civil War, they actually put their gunships in the up in New York, stationed them up there, and they refused to honor the British blockades. And
Wow.
they like to claim that they helped the founding of the United States. They have some affinity toward our coming to be as a nation state, as a country. And they sold us Alaska, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, just that little minor detail Stewart's
Yeah,
following.
just saying.
Just saying, no, you did do one better, and I expected, Michael, that you would. So as we close the podcast out today, Michael, where can people find your work and any thoughts you have for the audience today?
I don't do social media. Uh, I have a web. I don't have a website. I don't, as I say, I don't do social media. I do appear on RT and others, but if people want to get a hold of me, you can give them my email address, and
Okay.
And that's fine as well. So, but I think as a result of my years of security background, I like to keep a low profile.
It's a wise choice. Any encouraging thoughts that you have for the folks before we leave today about where we are in the next, say, 3 months?
Well, we're in uncharted waters for one thing, but I think we need to evaluate things in a very in terms of what's in the U.S. national interest. Is it worth us going to another war when we're trying to establish peace in 2 other wars? We don't need another war. We need to be working with folks. As you pointed out earlier, you hold your friends close, but your enemies closer. Let's get some dialogue going rather than having confrontation. And I think that this is the dilemma that Trump is facing. And I think that he needs to follow his own instinct in this regard. And I think he's going to prevail. I don't see us ultimately going to war with Iran because there will be consequences. But I hope I'm right.
I think you are. I believe you are. I think they're going to see the grave surrender of Iran because it's just not in their best interest to gin it up, or ours, to your point. And I apologize, so please forgive me, but I just one more second, if you don't mind, because I think your annulance of wealth of knowledge and wisdom and experience, which cannot be discounted in any way, I think demands the attention of people for this last seminal question. We were talking about BRICS before, because there's a lot of disinformation put out there. So you can help us to put it right, which is wholly what you're tasked to do. We have long told people about the foreign currencies like dinar and dong and the wealth that these nations represent. In your own personal experience, in your own travels, and in your personal conclusions, would you be able to confirm to those who are on the fence about these currencies that they are legitimate, they are real, it's not a scam, and that these countries will and have the ability to prosper?
I think they will. They have to be given the time. That's why you're seeing a great effort underway now through BRICS to set up the mechanisms for that. It takes time. Those mechanisms have to be set up, and they're waiting patiently, but it's all designed to really begin kicking in, perhaps beginning of next year. This past year has been in setting up that mechanism, in creating the development bank to allow these transactions to occur, but that's going to be the way of the future. You're going to see more developing countries getting more and more engaged, trading in their own currencies, and what it might also encompass, if they're all part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And China has its own financial mechanism that might be plugged into this thing too. Mm-hmm. that they will that they can actually set up free trade zones all the way from halfway around the world, in which things would be duty free if they're part of the Belt and Road, for example. I envision a major shift if economics and trade are emphasized instead of war. And I think that's going to be the key. And I think Donald Trump is trying to convey that, but he's facing a lot of resistance in that regard. But I think these countries want to trade. They want to they want to prosper. And they make that very clear. They want to be developing. They want to be developed. And otherwise you're going to have turmoil in those countries and this instability. And we see that now in certain countries with the advent of all these militias that rise up, which is really a substitute because they have nothing else.
Mm.
And they turn to more extremist ideologies and religions, which they call religions, but they're ideologies. And that creates further tensions in the world. That's what we got to try and diminish. And I think if people can prosper, people want to look out for their families and live a decent life. That's what they're going to strive for. And I think the leaderships that we're seeing and the mechanisms that are being set up today will help facilitate that.
Agreed. I think the goal here is peace and prosperity. That can be the
Yes.
prize, and that's where we need to aspire to. I totally agree with you. Thank you for that. And folks, if you are looking for the different foreign currencies, which you already know, or precious metals, we will leave those respective sponsor links in the description. Michael Maloof, thank you, good sir, for being back. Appreciate your graciousness and time and energy and passion and sincerity. We'll look forward to having you on again in the future.
Thank you very much for having me, John. Appreciate it.
Likewise. Same.